Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman. I have been absent for the last couple of weeks. I have been struggling with sickness. I'm not exactly sure what, but something that makes me sneeze. So I'm going to try to get through this podcast without sneezing. So if you hear a couple of them come out, I apologize for that now, and we'll try to edit them out. I have kind of come to a creative block when it comes to talking about the grief. I'm not sure where this is coming from. I think to myself, have I said everything I wanted to say about grief? And then I think again, no, there's so much to say. And then I ask myself, have we gone through it all? And I think no, because it's Christmas time. So for me, the holidays start with Halloween. And I think when you lose a child, especially if they're young, that this time of year is incredibly difficult. My husband loves trick-or-treaters. He just loves them. We do candy every year. But it's hard for me. It was hard for me when my kids stopped trick-or-treating. Now, Christopher was 25 years old. But the little kids are so cute, and they come to the door, and I'm reminded that I don't get to see Christopher's daughter, and any hopes of having more grandchildren ended when he died. And so it just becomes difficult. And then the change in the seasons, I don't know what it's like for people down south, but here in the frozen north, the closer we get to being dark, when you get home from work, the more for me, depressive symptoms kind of step in, and I dread the cold, I dread the dark, and I was reading about different ways to cope with the lack of sunlight. So I got twinkly lights, and they look really cool and everything, but when it's cold outside, all the twinkly lights in the world aren't going to help. So I don't know if it's just this time of year. Work has been incredibly stressful. I'm 57 years old, and I'm asking myself, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? Do I want to continue to work this very stressful job that I have, or do I want to move on to something different? And if I move on to something different, what does that look like? And how much time do I have to invest in something different? I don't want to work till the end of my life. And then I think about those kind of things. I went to the doctor recently, and we talked about stress again. And it just frustrates me to no end. I don't know how to re-educate the medical profession. But because I'm still sad about Christopher, and because a lot of my physical symptoms started after he died, they insist that I go to counseling. They insist that somehow counseling is going to make it better that my son died. It is not. I'm entitled to be sad because my son died. Like, all the counseling in the world is not going to help that. In fact, I went to counseling. I went to EMDR, and we got to this point where, you've worked on what you needed to work on, you know how to cope, you're just going to be sad. And I don't know why people just can't accept that. Just accept that I'm going to be sad. That there are days when the grief hits you harder and hits you longer. And that there's been real physical and mental consequences for losing a child. And that brings me back to why I did this podcast in the first place, which I'm starting to because of the stress at work, and mainly the stress at work and the consequences on my health. I'm not having time to do the podcast like I would like either. So I'm kind of at this crossroads of where to go from here. And so it would be great if I could get some feedback on what you guys would like to hear. What do you want to know more about grief? What do you need support with? What's going on with you in your grief? Now we're coming up on Christmas time. Some people believe in fake it till you make it, which is I put on this happy face and I pretend like everything's okay. But I gotta ask you, what is the cost to yourself for that? I live what I call authentically. I am out there with how I feel to everyone. If I'm sad, I'm going to tell you I'm sad. I'm going to tell you why I'm sad. If I'm mad, I'm going to tell you why I'm mad. I'm finding at work that I'm having to change my personality just because people aren't very nice. I have never been exposed to the kind of evil that I have been at my work. And I don't know, is it corporate America that breeds it? I am not sure. Was I sheltered because I worked at a counseling agency and I just saw clients one-on-one every day instead of interacting with people or groups of people? I have no idea, but I have been absolutely blown away in the last 3 years at the behavior of adults. It flabbergasts me. Absolutely flabbergasts me. So then I find myself thinking about, really, this is how people behave? Like, I would rather spend hours talking to someone about their problems than deal with what I'm dealing with at work. And it's weird that the non-counselors of the world will say, how can you sit there and listen to people's problems all day? And it's like, it's easy. It's easy. You just be there and you provide support and, help them through it. But this chaos that happens at people's work is just unreal. And so I'm kind of at this crisis point or pathway point of where to go from here. Where's the next step? I have considered getting into YouTube, but then there's the whole learning a new platform, being on camera. It was hard enough to learn how to be on just your voice. And I know that that's part of the reason why people hold back from wanting to come on the podcast is because they don't want to hear themselves. But you get used to it. And if you're thinking about coming on the podcast, what I would do is record yourself and listen to yourself until you get used to it. Because I'd love to hear other people's points of view on grief. What are you struggling with? Let's hear your stories. We've talked about me enough. And I think that's part of it is I feel like I've talked about my experiences, but I would like to know about yours. What's going on with you? And I know it's difficult, but it's very freeing. I cannot emphasize that enough. So there's this form of therapy called narrative therapy, which is you tell your story. I really think that that's what people in grief need. And there's also people that are verbal processors. There's people that, are thinkers. And if you're a verbal processor, which I am very much, which I have to talk it out, being on this podcast has been incredibly helpful. And I want to stay away from the regular format because I see other podcasts and I see people putting out there, well, let's talk to this grief expert and let's talk to that grief expert. Number one, I have a bias, which is no one's a grief expert because it's a solitary journey, right? No one can be an expert. I believe that all of us have to find our own way through this. And you find your own way through it by talking about it, by researching different things, and by support. At least that's my belief system. So I want to stick with the format that I have, which I have in my mind, which is to talk to people that are actually grieving and see what's going on with them. Because they might be experiencing things that I haven't experienced. And I look what's going on in the world and all the people that are dying, and I think about all those grieving moms, grieving siblings, and it makes me just sad for our world. I think grief, and I've said it before, grief is going to become a major health crisis here in a few years. Before, we never used to talk about it. We've made movements. We've made movements in the right direction, but we need to make more. So now everybody talks about how it lasts a lifetime. It's always there, which it is. But how do we go about bringing about that cultural change where people get used to hearing about it? So that's the thing, right? So we can put it on Instagram, but what's happening in your daily lives? Are people listening to you? Are they listening to your grief stories? That's what I would like to know. And I also would like to know, so Christopher died 11 years ago. And I'm wondering, how has funeral homes changed? Are they treating people differently now? Because I remember this lady was interviewing me when I was writing Christopher's obituary. I had no idea it was the obituary, and I read it in the newspaper. I'm like, oh, that's what you were doing? Like, did she explain it to me? I don't think she explained to me what she was doing. You know, nobody else had ever died in my life. And I just think there could have been more education by the funeral homes themselves. And I seen an advertisement for grief recovery down the street. And I asked myself, when did grief become something we had to recover from? I will always love my son. Always. I will always miss him. And I don't want to stop doing that. I don't want to stop missing Christopher. I don't want to stop talking about Christopher. I don't even want to stop being sad. I could do with not being depressed, but I don't think that has anything to do with Christopher. I think it just aggravated what was already present. So I think, what do I need to recover from? And it's overwhelming at first. It's very overwhelming at first. So if you're newly grieved, I think that my best advice to you would be is to dive deep into it. And I talk about this all the time. And I know people, it's so painful, you just really don't want to do it. But the fact of the matter is that you're going to do it anyway. You're not going to escape from it. It's always going to be present. So allow yourself to feel what you need to feel. God, it hurts. And I'm not saying that it won't. But 11 years out, I can tell you that I don't feel like I'm getting stabbed in the heart when I think about Christopher these days. I just get an ache and a missing. And Christmas is hard. So let's talk about how we prepare. How are we going to prepare for the holidays? You're going to prepare by knowing that you're going to be sad. Don't pretend. And seriously, if you have people in your life that expect you to not talk about them, to not have them around, do you want to be around those people on these very hard days? And that's really something that I think that we need to talk about as a society, is that we get into these family groups. And we all have issues in our families. You have some people that drink too much. You have people that talk politics. No one really gets along. And they get together for this major holiday, and everybody walks away miserable, and they dread it. And they just, so why are you engaging in it? Have you ever asked yourself that? I do. There's a lot of things I just don't participate in because I'm just not interested. I'm not willing to put myself out there into that kind of way. So that's something you really need to think about first. It is, where is my physical health? Where is my mental health? Especially if you're newly grieved. Where's my physical health? Where's my mental health? And where's my emotional health? So emotional health, I want to make this distinction because this is how I see it. This is Christy's ideas, no one else's ideas. It's not coming from therapy. It is just Christy's idea. Your emotional health is, am I feeling sad? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling irritable? Your emotions. Where are you at emotionally? Your mental health is that sadness to the point where I can't get out of bed, where I just get overwhelmed and I cry all the time. And it's been more than a year since your child died. I mean, so depression just feels different. I don't still know how to explain it. So depression feels different. There's low motivation. Usually the depression exists. And then there's anxiety, all of those things. So that's more on the emotional or the mental health part of it. And so when I say mental health, I'm talking about an actual diagnosis. When I'm talking about your emotional health, I'm talking about just how you feel. So you look at those things and you say, how am I, and especially if you're brand new, you're like, how am I emotionally? When I think about sitting at that table and think about sitting there with those people, do I feel like I can be authentic with how I feel? Which is, if I'm sad, I go within myself. And this really used to bother my son a lot, where I would be okay for an hour or two, and then I would just go within myself because I was missing Christopher so much, and I got quieter and I didn't talk as much. And I'm quite a talker, so it's quite noticeable. And then I was just done. I had people enough. And so then the anxiety piece comes in too, because then I get anxious. Are people going to say the right things? Am I going to cry? What if I do cry? What if someone brings Christopher up? What am I going to do? So I get anxious about those kind of things. So then I do an evaluation of, where am I in my life? Am I, and I hate to put it, stable enough, but that is what I'm thinking is, am I stable enough, or will be for that day, that I feel like I can manage myself? Where will my physical health be? In the early days, I got sick, physically sick. I got nauseous, runny nose, cold, whatever virus was going around at that time, I'd have it at Thanksgiving, which also, though, gave me an out. I got to be real about it. I was almost always sick at Christmas time, too. And traditionally, I've hated Christmas time before Christopher died. So Christopher dying just aggravated the whole Christmas situation. So I look at all of those factors. And then I make my plans based on that. On Thanksgiving, create traditions. I say this every year, but I cannot emphasize how important they are. Create traditions. Our current tradition with my son is, we don't make the same foods every year for Thanksgiving. We come together and we decide, what are we going to try this year? and we come up with a plan and everybody cooks it and we all get together. And it's not necessarily always on Thanksgiving. We have stopped emphasizing that you have to have Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day because that just leads to disappointment, right? Because there's in-laws, there's work, there's other things that contribute on whether or not you can have Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day. But also understand we're a military family. And when my kids were younger, that's how we had to do it. My husband might have to work on Thanksgiving Day, so we had a different Thanksgiving Day or a different Valentine's Day or a different Christmas Day. That we're just used to it. And so we have Christmas and Thanksgiving on whatever day we pick. Doesn't matter whether it's the actual day. And we get together and we don't play games or anything because I've never been a game player myself. My understanding is my son does that with his in-laws, which is fine. We do something different. And we just sit around and talk and hang out and we just be together. I make art projects for my granddaughter to keep her occupied. It's just enjoyable for everyone. But I always make a plate for Christopher. He's always on my mind. I make a plate for him. I go to the cemetery and take the plate to the cemetery, other foods, as a way to honor him. And again, it doesn't have to be on the day of Thanksgiving. I put that pressure on myself very early on, and now I don't. And my son chooses not to participate in that first year. Well, second year, he just couldn't. That's fine. My feelings were hurt the second year until I realized he has to grieve his way. And I realized he does because his grandmother died in 2020, or was it 2021? Can't remember. Anyway, my mother died somewhere, I think it's 2020. No, it's 2021. Colin went to Christopher's grave and said he was really struggling with my mom dying, but he wanted to talk to Christopher about it, and Christopher wasn't around to talk to him. Do you hear that tearing in my voice? See, the grief just sneaks up on you. I've just gotten used to it because I'm real. This podcast is real. I'm all about being real because I can't expect other people to be real about their grief if I'm not. I take food out to the cemetery. Christmas time, I have a Christmas tree. Now, I live in the frozen north, so it snows. Thank God for Dollar Trees. I have a Christmas tree that I take out to the cemetery, and we stake it into the ground so it doesn't blow away and get battery operated lights. And then on Christmas Eve, we go and turn on the lights and let the lights run until the batteries die. And then in the spring, we pick up the Christmas tree. And then again, I take him out a spirit plate for Christmas dinner. Those are our traditions. And they're very healing. So pick some traditions. Incorporate your child into your holidays. Now, I'm a believer that they come and visit us on our holidays and on special occasions, that they're right there with us. They come from wherever they are, wherever you believe they are, and they come to us and they celebrate with us. And I think that they appreciate the fact that they are remembered. I don't go as far as putting a picture on the table. Sometimes I think about it, but I don't. Part of me wants to get one of those age regression photos, get him age regress to how old he would be now. So he would be 37. I can't hardly believe it that he'd be 37 years old. And that's what we do for Christmas. But honestly, you white knuckle it. You white knuckle it all the way through. It's just a sad time. And just accept that you're sad. And then you got to focus on self-care. Do you know what self-care looks like? Most people don't. They think self-care looks like taking a bath or drinking hot tea. Well, it might be for some people. But when you're grieving, self-care means allowing yourself to be. If you need to cry, go in the shower and cry. I know most people don't like to ugly cry. I hate ugly crying. But sometimes, so you ugly cry in the shower so nobody can see. And I know there's an awful lot of mamas that are up in the middle of the night, especially around Christmas time. Have a conversation. Think about your favorite memories. Do some meditation. I talk to Christopher. I'm not going to lie. When I'm alone in the car and there's nobody around and I have something to say, I have a conversation with him. And some of them have been tough conversations. After I went to that medium and she told me that Christopher said I needed not to call on him so much. Oh man, me and Christopher had quite the conversation after that. And again, whether you believe he's actually listening or it's just me verbally processing what that woman told me, it really doesn't matter. What matters is that I had to come to my own peaceful, how do I even want to say it? I had to come to peace with what she said. And so the conversation that I had with Christopher went like this. He doesn't get to dictate how I grieve. If I want to call on him and I want to think about him, it is on me. And that if I needed his help, I would say, Christopher, I need some help. But he didn't have to come every time I called or thought about him or talked about him, or because that was impacting my grieving. And some might say that, this is why on my podcast I said, you want to go to a medium? Are you sure? Because you got to be prepared for what they say. It could not be true, right? Or it could be true. Could go both ways. But it didn't matter because the damage was done, right? Once she said it to me, the damage was done. And you never know if it's a fact. You never know if it's a fact. But then me, because I have anxiety, I was like, it's true, it's true, it's true. So I really had to talk myself down from that. And if you get into those situations, I encourage you to talk it out. Whether you're verbally processing, it really doesn't matter if you believe they're listening or not listening. What matters is that you're having a conversation. And really, who are you having the conversation with? You're having the conversation with yourself. Helping yourself sort things out. I am a firm believer in self-talk. And that's all it is self-talk. So thanks for listening to my rambling. I hope it was helpful. Please reach out. It's better to reach out on Instagram or Facebook. I haven't been very active. I'm going to try to be more active this week. Let me know what you want to hear. Do you have any show ideas? Thanks for listening. This is Christy. I've been missing Kai a lot. Signing off. You have a good week.